Should you read the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb? Hey Book Dragons, I recently finished reading the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb, and I wanted to talk a little bit about it and see if we can figure out if this is a series that you might want to read as well. Before we do, if you enjoy this video today, please like the video, please subscribe to my channel, join my Discord if you want to chat more about the video and other videos that I make. And so let's get right to it. So first of all, what is the Farseer Trilogy? It is the first trilogy in the larger series known as the Realm of the Elderlings, written by Robin Hobb, or as she's known among many fantasy fans as Queen Hobb. And rightfully so. Robin Hobb is a fantastic writer. That is one of the things that really sticks out to me with this series, is her writing capability, excellent skill. Her prose is almost unmatched. She's just a very, very good writer. She has a way of drawing you in as a reader and making you care about the characters. Her character work is just amazing. So there's a lot to love about Robin Hobb. This series takes place in the Six Duchies. It's an island kingdom, so it's surrounded by water, and there's a lot of trade that goes on their coastlines. They have ships that they carry out their trade ventures with. It's a thriving kingdom. The main stronghold for the Six Duchies is the kingdom of Buckkeep. That is where the king resides and his sons. They all live there, and so that's the seat of the kingdom in the Six Duchies. And this is a first-person, character-focused story told from the perspective of Fitz Chivalry Farseer in the future. So he is writing a memoir of sorts and recounting his time growing up in the Six Duchies as a boy. And he recounts all of his adventures and the people he meets, the shenanigans he gets into, and the memoir style really flows quite nicely. As with any book that I talk about, I like to talk about the characters because I'm a very character-focused reader. And this was a good series for that. As I mentioned, the characters are really good. The biggest character in the story is Fitz Chivalry Farseer, of course. And Fitz is an illegitimate son. In fact, his name is a common name given to illegitimate children. If you hear of somebody being a Fitz, they're called that because they are illegitimate. And so he was born to one of the kings in waiting for the Six Duchies throne, and that is Prince Chivalry Farseer. After finding out about the child, he stepped down, he abdicated the throne, and so his brother Verity became the king in waiting. And King Shrewd is the king, and he is, at the very start of this story, very front and center. He kind of takes Fitz under his wing, and eventually Prince Chivalry's wife, Patience, comes into the picture, and she comes to Buckkeep and starts to get to know Fitz and take him under her wing as well and teach him things. And that's what a lot of the story is centered around, is Fitz learning different skills from different important people in the kingdom, and people who, for the most part, really have his best interests at heart. Not all of them do, of course, and some of them have ulterior motives, but for the most part, he has a lot of people who really care about him. One of which is especially Verity. He is apprenticed to a few different people in the kingdom. One of the major players that he is apprenticed to is a mysterious figure known as Shade. and Shade teaches him the fine art of being an assassin. And that is where we get the names for the books in this series. Assassin's Apprentice being the first book, Royal Assassin is the second book, and Assassin's Quest being the third book. His identity is more or less wrapped up in being an assassin, even though he doesn't do a whole lot of assassin work throughout the series. He does some, but not a whole lot. But that is the primary skill that he is taught, and it comes in handy for him at different points in the story. There's also Prince Regal, who is also one of King Shrewd's sons, but by his second wife. He's not going to have all the rights and privileges that Verity will, because Verity is the king in waiting. If something were to happen to Verity, of course, Regal would be next in line for the throne. And even though Fitz is technically a Farseer, because he's a bastard, he cannot ascend the throne. So Regal would technically be next in line if something happens to Verity. And you can imagine that that brings up a whole lot of political maneuvering and plotting and different things like that, jealousy and infighting in the family. And that makes for a really interesting tale throughout this story as well. The character relationships are really fascinating to watch. And eventually an alliance is formed, and Verity takes a wife, and so Fitz gets to know his wife as well. Ketrican is her name, and so she plays a major role throughout the story as well, and she's just an absolutely amazing character. I love Ketrican. She's one of the more fascinating characters in the story. There's also the Fool. We don't really learn the Fool's name or very much of his origins, but he starts out basically as the court jester for the king, and he develops a very close bond with Fitzchivalry over the course of these books, and they have lots of interesting adventures together and stuff like that. So the Fool is very cryptic. He also seems to have a somewhat supernaturally prolonged lifespan. He's a fascinating character. I really, really love the Fool. In fact, the Fool is probably my favorite character in the story. Fitz makes a new friend early on in the story. Her name is Molly, and she's a girl from the villages outside Buckkeep, and he befriends her, and they have a really neat relationship that spans over the story, and it grows and it changes. I don't want to say more because it doesn't end up being what you expect it to be. But Molly's a really cool character. Burrick is the stable hand for the Kingdom of Buckkeep, and he has taken an oath to protect Fitzchivalry and watch over him, and Fitz ends up spending time in the stables and learning the art of working with the horses and other animals of the kingdom. And this is where he really starts to learn things about himself and some of the skills that he has. Fitz ends up having a lot of animal companions over the course of the story, one of which is a wolf named Night Eyes, and that's probably the strongest of the bonds that he has with different animals in the story. Night Eyes is just a wonderful character, just absolutely fascinating. So let's talk quickly about the magic system. The magic system is pretty simple and straightforward in talking about it, even though it's extremely complex. So I won't go into too many of those details, but just to give you a brief overview, there is one magic called the skill, and that is the primary magic that is used by the Farseer line. And as you grow in the skill, you become able to take over the minds of others, implant thoughts in the minds of others, control the actions of others. It's very much a terrifying magic, and it's been given so many restrictions in the kingdom except in the kingly line, and so it takes a while for Fitz to learn the skill, and he never totally masters it to the point that he can use it on a daily basis and for it to really do him any good, even though there are points in the story that it does do him some good. So you'll see that if you read the series. Another magic system in this is the wit. It is also known as being of the old blood, and these are people who can bond with animals so much so that they can take on the characteristics of those animals and even become feral if they're not careful. If they get so wrapped up in the wit, they can lose any sense of being a human being at all. So that's the extreme of it. The average use of the wit is quite interesting, and the wit is very much despised because of the risks and because it can make people into animals. People look down on it very heavily as this awful thing that if somebody has the wit, they should just be killed because they're never going to be any good, and they're just going to devolve into some type of ferocious animal and start killing people and all this kind of things. There are a lot of rumors about the history of the wit. A lot of false information is promoted around the kingdom about it, and so there's a lot of stigma around having the wit. It allows the person who has that ability to bond with animals, to communicate with them, to exchange energies, and to almost have a symbiotic relationship with the animals that they bond with. And so Fitz does have the wit, and he bonds with a few different animals throughout the story. He uses it in a very minor way with other animals in the story, just to speak with them and reassure them. You know, it allows him to kind of help calm the horses down and things like that. So it's a really cool magic, and I really like that about it. And there's also what I am calling the blood wit. I'm not sure if that's what it's called, but there is one part of the story where the wit is kind of mixed with a sort of blood magic. And there's a very small section of the book where it happens, and it kind of throws you for a loop when it happens. You're like, oh, okay, so we're doing this now, are we? And so I won't go more into the blood wit, as I call it, but it's pretty interesting, and I think you will really enjoy reading about it. I know I did. I thought it was a pretty neat twist on the wit. So yeah, I quite liked all the magic systems in this story. So let's talk about some of the threats. One of the threats I kind of already mentioned, and that's the infighting within the kingdom, especially among the Farseer family. There's a lot of tension there and political plotting that are going on. There's a lot of dukes from the other duchies that come and pay homage to the king, and they sit on his council, and there's political maneuverings there as well. So that kind of becomes a threat as the story progresses. And there's one particular character in the book that has aspirations for the throne, and so they become quite a large threat as well. The other major threat in the story are the Red Ship Raiders, and they're kind of like pirates, and they come and steal men and women and children, and they send them back to their families in a state of what becomes known as forging. So if a person gets forged, they've lost all sense of humanness almost, and they've been reduced to animals, and they form into packs and just attack people on the road and steal their food, and sometimes, you know, they'll physically attack them, they'll bite them and things like that. They've just been reduced to animals more or less, and they're kind of like zombies, but they're not walking dead. They're still alive, but they might as well be dead because their minds are completely gone. So that's the major threat in this story that spans all three books, and trying to figure out how to defeat the Red Ship Raiders and keep the towns from being destroyed and keep people from being killed by the raiders, and or either that or sent back forged. So that becomes a big problem throughout the story. So let's talk briefly about some of the themes in the story. One of which is the importance of human connection, just emphasizing how important it is to have other people in our lives. Another one is the risks of having a strong drive for vengeance. It tends to make you irrational and do stupid things and put yourself at risk as well as other people at risk if you're so driven for vengeance. And another thing that really stuck out to me is the importance of not focusing so much on appearances and making assumptions about people. One of my favorite parts in the story is when they start having a discussion about the fool's gender. One person assumes he's female, and yet Fitz has always thought him to be male, and they've always kind of talked about him as a male, but then all of a sudden this person is talking about him being female, and so Fitz starts having a discussion with him at one point, and I really love what the fool says. I'm going to read it to you here. He says, "That is one thing that in all my years among your folk I have never become accustomed to, the great importance that you attach to what gender one is." And then later on at one point the fool strikes a pose in the middle of the forest trail, and he launches into a song. "Oh, when the fool pisses, pray tell, what's the angle? Did we take down his pants, would he dimple or dangle?" And I just started laughing out loud because it's so hilarious and ludicrous, but so poignant. Because ultimately what matters is that people are human. You know, it doesn't matter what gender they identify as. What matters is that they're human and they need to be treated as human beings with love and compassion and equality. And I just loved that passage, and I wanted to read it because I thought that was really, really wonderful. So yeah, that was that was done in a very funny and humorous way, but it really illustrates a powerful point. And there are other themes that pop up in the story as well. Found family is another theme that pops up as well. So there's lots of other themes to explore in this story, but I've just listed a few. Let's talk about some of my pros, and then we'll talk about cons as well. I mentioned earlier how I really loved the character work. That probably sticks out to me the most of all of my pros, because Hobb really is a fantastic character writer. She really knows how to explore the psychology and the emotions of human beings. And I thought it was just a fascinating study into Fitz in particular, and also the characters around him. It does have a very interesting set of magic systems, which we already explored, so I won't go into those, but I thought the magic is very unique and fairly complex as well. And I really liked the ending of the story. I thought it was quite climactic. I did not expect it to end the way it did. There are things that I assumed would happen at the end that kind of happened, but very differently and unexpected. So I was really impressed that Robin Hobb was still able to pull off a surprise for me. So now I do want to talk about the cons, and for me, the cons really have to do with Fitz Chivalry Farseer. While he is a fascinating character, and I really, really liked him, there were times that he really grated on me. There are many times in the story that he's just stuck feeling sorry for himself, and a lot of things happen to Fitz. He's had a hard life. I'm not discounting that at all, but he seems to be constantly in a state of feeling sorry for himself at times, engaging in lots of self-pity, and so that kind of grated on me. It's part of him growing as a character. I get that, and so I learned to overlook it, but it did get old at times. And I do have kind of an unpopular opinion, and that is that Fitz is not a very interesting character by himself. He is much more interesting when he has other people around him and when he's interacting with those other people and helping them out and they're helping him out and they're traveling together. Those are the times that Fitz is the most interesting. And I think that is probably intentional on Robin Hobb's part, because we talked about that theme of the importance of human connections and having relationships and having people around you and in your life. It's the relationships that Fitz makes with people that really define who he is, I think. Not that he isn't defined as an individual by himself as well. He is. The other characters in the story, the secondary characters, really enhance Fitz and make him more interesting. That may be an unpopular opinion. I understand that. There were times when Fitz was by himself and roaming the countryside just off on his own, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of boring. so that if you're looking for a main character that is always fun and interesting to be around, yeah, Fitz is not always fun and interesting to be around. I enjoyed him much more when he was with other people. And along with that, there are several moments in the trilogy where it's a very slow burn. It really slows down, and it's kind of hard to just sit there and get through. I fired up the audiobook for book 3, which helped a lot, because I would say Assassin's Quest is the slowest of the 3 books. And I didn't want to DNF any book in the series, but if I had DNF'd a book, it would have been Assassin's Quest, because there were just moments where I'm like, okay, we could have gotten rid of big chunks here and kind of sped things up. So that was a con for me. Let's talk about my ranking for each of the books in the series, and then we'll give my overall rank, okay? Assassin's Apprentice was a Horde book for me. That is one that I definitely want in my Horde. I really enjoyed it. It was a fantastic start to the series. Royal Assassin was my favorite book of 2022, and that book soared for me. That was an absolutely fantastic book. Sure, there were flaws here and there, but overall it was just the best book I read last year, and I can't say enough good about Royal Assassin. I would say that Assassin's Quest is shiny. It definitely had its good moments, but it definitely was not the best book in the series. So overall, if I had to rank the series, I'm going to put it in my Horde. The series as a whole does not quite hit that soaring level, but it's definitely in my Horde. It's definitely something that I am happy I own. I would probably reread it again at some point. Maybe not Assassin's Quest. I don't know if Assassin's Quest is really rereadable, but I might skip a big chunk in the middle and just kind of go to the end because I kind of know what happens. But yeah, I would definitely reread it again. And I'm very excited to continue the Realm of the Elderlings and start reading Live Ship Traders here soon. So that is all I have to say on the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb. What are your thoughts? Have you read this series? If you haven't, are you more excited to read it now? Are you less excited? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to talk with you about it. Hit me up on my Discord as well. We can talk about it there. That's all I have, guys. Make sure you are reading more books. I'll talk to you soon.